Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a sleepy little stroll back to a time when people weren't just afraid of witches, they were afraid of werewolves. That's right. Before the hysteria of Salem's witch trials ever kicked off, Europe was busy throwing actual werewolf trials, complete with courtroom confessions, public executions, and judges earnestly asking, "So, do you grow fur at night?" You might think you're ready for this bedtime history journey, but let's be honest. You probably won't survive this one if you're afraid of hairy things in the dark. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky is dark, and you're walking a dirt path that cuts through a foggy field somewhere in rural 16th century Europe. There's no sound but the wind through the trees and the occasional yelp of a distant dog. Or, was that a wolf? You tighten your cloak. Behind you, you swear you hear footsteps. But when you turn, nothing's there. You keep walking. This is how it always begins. In the silence, in the suspicion, in the shadows. The village you arrive in is small. Timber-framed homes lean together like gossips whispering secrets. The people are nervous. A few goats have gone missing. Then a child. No one saw anything, but everyone felt it, and when dawn came, something red and sticky marked the edges of the wood. Blood on snow always looks more dramatic, doesn't it? The local priest tries to calm everyone, but he also gives a sermon about sin and savagery, and the fine line between man and beast. You notice he looks at old Henrik in the back row when he says that. Henrik's beard is a little too wild. His eyes don't blink often enough. And let's be honest, he's definitely growling under his breath. This is where fear finds its footing, not with fact, but with a twitch, a glance, a goat that didn't come home. Over the next few days, stories start to spread like frost across window panes. Marta claims she saw a man with a tail leaping a fence near the mill. Gertie swears she heard howling and then, get this, talking coming from the same spot. You sip your broth slower. You sleep with one eye open. You begin to wonder about that time you saw your neighbor gnawing a chicken bone a little too enthusiastically. And then the first accusation comes. They say it's Bernard, the old woodsman who lives just past the creek, the one who walks alone and doesn't attend Mass as often as he should. They say his breath smells like raw meat, that his fingernails are too sharp, that he once wrestled a boar bare-handed and won. Is that a werewolf thing? Historians still argue whether such accusations were always based in superstition, or if some were just clever ways to deal with people the village didn't like. The guards drag Bernard in chains to the town square. His face is bruised, but his eyes are steady. Someone in the crowd throws a potato. It misses. Not by much, though. Under questioning, Bernard laughs. He says he's no wolf. Then again, what else would a werewolf say? They say he turned on the full moon, that he wears a wolfskin belt that lets him shift shape. One boy claims he saw Bernard with a black dog, who whispered instructions to him. You wonder if the boy might be exaggerating, but no one else seems to question it. You notice something odd. No one's talking about the missing goats anymore, or the child. It's like the moment a suspect is named, the mystery doesn't matter. People just want to believe something has been done. This isn't a world where you need evidence, just a hint of fur, a missing shoe, or a strange smell on the wind. And that's enough to get you chained to a wall, while a very serious man with a very silly hat asks, "Do you prefer hunting rabbits or children in your beast form?" It's easy to laugh now, but back then they took it deathly serious, because once fear took root, it blossomed into ritual, into trial, into execution. That night, as you lie in your straw bed, you think you hear a howl again. But maybe it's just the wind. You pull your blanket tighter anyway, just in case. Oh, and that strange paste Marta was seen rubbing on her chest before bed. Some say it was just goose fat and herbs. Others say it was a magical unguent that helped her fly in dreams or turn into something else. Historians still debate whether these ointments were drug-induced hallucinations or symbolic acts tied to pagan ritual. The line between the mundane and the monstrous was razor thin, and you're walking it now. You wake with a start. It's early morning, and the fog still hangs low like a blanket someone forgot to lift. The village is quieter than usual, suspiciously quiet. You notice that the baker's window isn't steamed up like it should be. No bread baking, no clatter of hooves or cluck of hens. You glance around and realize people are watching their neighbors more than they're watching the road. Because after Bernard's arrest, the question on everyone's mind isn't, "Is there a werewolf among us?" It's, "Who's next?" This is how suspicion works. It doesn't fade. It spreads. The village council meets again in the same cold, echoing hall where they met just last week to discuss a shipment of barley. Only now they're passing around crude sketches of paws and reading from books that claim wolves can wear human faces. One man stands up to insist that his cousin saw a person grow fur during a thunderstorm. Another describes a time he got lost in the woods and swears a wolf spoke to him in Latin. You start to notice something else. The people being accused, they're not all strangers. They're the awkward ones, sure, the loners, the ones who mumble at markets or forget to say amen at the right time. But they're also sometimes the ones with land disputes or old debts, or a scandalous lover from years past. It's funny how monstrous people become when they owe someone a pig. This, more than anything, is where the legend of the werewolf grows legs, or claws in this case. Because these weren't just stories told to children around the hearth. These were full-blown accusations that led to real consequences. And not just in your little village. All across Europe, communities were grappling with the idea that their fellow humans might be secretly slipping into fur and fangs under the full moon. Some believed it was a punishment from God. Others thought it was a curse passed on through bites. A few even claimed it was voluntary. Men and women who made deals with dark forces in exchange for the power to roam as wolves, to hunt freely, to shed their humanity and become something primal. You might think, well, that's just old-timey superstition. But here's where it gets weirder. Some of the people accused actually confessed, and not because they were tortured, though, let's be clear, many were. Some just calmly admitted to it. "I roam the forest as a wolf," one man in France said, "and I feast on the flesh of sinners." When asked how he turned, he spoke of a magical salve made from baby fat and nightshade. Yum! Another man claimed he'd been initiated by a mysterious stranger in a tavern who handed him a belt. Not a stylish one, a cursed one. Once he strapped it on, he claimed he felt his body twist, his bones ache, and his teeth sharpen. You're probably wondering, were these people mad? Were they lying? Were they drugged? Or was this all a misunderstood metaphor gone terribly out of control? Historians still argue whether these confessions were born of delusion, desperation, or something even darker, like suppressed psychological trauma wrapped in a cultural myth. One fringe theory even suggests some believed the wolf form was symbolic, a way to express rage and resistance in a time when peasants had no power. If you couldn't fight your oppressors as a man, maybe you could as a beast. But whatever the cause, the villagers believed it. And once belief took root, it justified everything else. Bernard's cell is empty now. No one talks about it. Instead, they talk about Anselm, the leather worker with a crooked smile and suspiciously sharp knives. Last winter, someone claimed he sold them a pair of boots made from something that smelled like wolf hide. The details are fuzzy. The implications are not. That night, you hear another scream. You follow the noise. Of course you do, because you're very brave for someone in a story like this. But by the time you arrive, there's just a group of people standing over a patch of trampled ground and a smear of something red that's still glistening. Someone says they saw fur. Someone else swears it was just a dog, but that's the thing. Truth doesn't matter anymore. Belief has already sharpened its teeth, and it's not just your village. In the distance, across France, Germany, Switzerland, the same pattern unfolds. A missing animal, a suspicious neighbor, a man who walks alone and howls in his sleep. Local courts open up actual werewolf case files, not metaphorical ones, real scrolls, real stamps, real trials. One scholar recently stumbled upon a 1530s document that read, "The accused did admit to the eating of lambs and 2 Christian children while in lupine form." The phrase "in lupine form" is somehow the most chilling part. You try to sleep, but your dreams are strange. You see the woods again, and this time something's watching you from between the trees. It isn't snarling, it's smiling. That's worse. The next morning, you overhear something at the well. 2 women whispering. One of them says, "What if it's not a man at all? What if the wolf is just a wolf?" The other gasps and glances around like she just heard treason. That kind of thinking can get you accused too, because in this place, in this time, the only thing more dangerous than believing in monsters is not believing in them. You're walking now further out toward the edges of the forest. The path beneath your feet grows less defined, more tangled, like it's been walked less by people and more by things with paws. The trees loom taller, the branches twist a little too deliberately, and for the first time you wonder whether the stories might have roots deeper than just fear. Because today you're headed to 16th century France, specifically the Franche-Comté region, where one of the first full-blown werewolf panics set Europe's hair on end. This isn't a spooky fireside tale. It's an actual court case. Multiple ones, in fact. And it all starts with a brutal attack. 2 hunters discover a mutilated body deep in the woods. Not just killed, savaged. Limbs torn, throat ripped. The kind of scene that even modern forensic experts might call yikes. It looks like the work of a wild animal. A wolf, maybe. But then someone spots something strange nearby. Human footprints, bare ones, leading away from the body. Now, you could be rational. Say maybe a person came upon the body afterward. Maybe they fled the scene. But this is the 1500s, and the popular theory is, obviously, this means it was a man who turned into a wolf, did the killing, and then turned back. Logical leap? Definitely. But once fear takes the wheel, logic's left in the back seat with no snacks. Authorities soon arrest a man named Pierre Burgot. He's a local shepherd, quiet, solitary, known for talking to his sheep a little more than is socially acceptable. Under intense questioning, read, very pointy interrogation tools, Pierre breaks. He confesses to being a werewolf. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. According to Pierre, he met a mysterious man in black years ago. The man offered him protection for his sheep. If Pierre would renounce God and serve the devil. In return, he'd be given a salve, a potion, and the ability to become a wolf whenever he wished. Pierre says he did it, that he rubbed the magical ointment on his skin and felt his body twist and snarl until he dropped to all fours and ran through the forest, hunting humans. Now, you might think, surely no one believed this, but oh, they did, enthusiastically, and Pierre wasn't the only one. Soon after, another man, Michel Verdun, is arrested. He too confesses. He backs up Pierre's story, adding that they sometimes hunted together in wolf form. There's even a third man, Philibert Monteau. Same story, same salve, same satanic agreement. It's like a furry version of a book club. The authorities are thrilled. See, they say, we told you there were werewolves. No one questions the fact that these confessions came only after hours, sometimes days, of brutal torture. And no one wonders why the details sound suspiciously similar. That would require logic. And again, logic isn't invited to these trials. What's wild is that these aren't isolated cases. France has dozens of them, possibly hundreds. In just a few decades, werewolf trials become as common as land disputes and bad dental hygiene. The fear spreads faster than fleas on a hound. There's a pattern, too. Accusations typically arise after a violent attack. A child goes missing. A traveler is found mauled. The locals panic. Rumors circulate. And then someone remembers that their neighbor Pierre once howled at the moon while drunk on cider. Boom! Werewolf. The legal process isn't subtle. First, arrest, then accusation, then confession, then execution. In some cases, the accused are burned alive. In others, they're decapitated and their bodies buried at crossroads, just to be safe, in case the devil tries a resurrection. One document from 1573 details a man named Gilles Garnier, also from Franche-Comté, who was caught in lupine form attacking a child in the woods. The court described in meticulous detail how Garnier's fur-covered body was spotted mid-transformation. How convenient! He confessed, again under duress, and was sentenced to death. Historians still argue whether these werewolf panics were born of genuine belief or just convenient scapegoating. Some see them as echoes of the earlier witch hunts, wrapped in fur instead of broomsticks. Others suggest mass hysteria, fueled by famine, stress, and fear of the unknown. You know, the usual medieval cocktail. But there's a fringe theory that deserves a bedtime detour. Ergotism. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye. If consumed in contaminated bread, it causes hallucinations, paranoia, convulsions, and, wait for it, delusions of being chased or transformed. Some scholars suggest that rural populations suffering from ergot poisoning might have genuinely believed they were wolves, or at least believed that their weird cousin Michelle was one. Either way, the bread was to blame. Yet again, carbs betray us. Back in your little village, the gossip spreads faster now. People recount Pierre's confession like it's scripture. Kids dare each other to walk past his abandoned cottage. Someone claims they saw paw prints near his door, but they mysteriously vanish halfway across the path. You find yourself walking a little faster after dark. And here's a juicy detail. Not all werewolves were violent. A few confessions describe people who turned only to run through the forest, to escape the pressures of daily life. One claimed he became a wolf just to nap under trees in peace. Honestly, same. Still, it didn't matter whether your wolf self was violent or mellow. If you admitted to being one or were merely accused, the outcome was the same, and you were probably not getting a fair trial. So now you know. Europe's first werewolf panic wasn't just stories whispered around a fire. It was law. It was blood. It was hysteria dressed in a judge's robe, banging a gavel and asking, "Do you shed during the summer months?" The woods grow darker. The trail fades. But the fear? It's just getting started. You're back in the village square again, but the air feels heavier. Not just because of the gathering storm clouds or the smell of something suspiciously burnt, lingering from last night's justice, but because today's story doesn't concern a grown man or a wandering loner. Today, it's about a boy. His name is Jean Grenier, and he's only 13 years old when he's accused of being a werewolf. We're in the early 1600s now, in the rugged, wind-bitten countryside of Gascony, southwest France. The region is poor, rural, and riddled with old forest paths and superstitions thicker than the sheep's wool, hanging from every fence post. And people are nervous. Children are disappearing again. No trace left behind but claw marks and silence. You've heard this song before. The townspeople talk. As always, they need an explanation, a scapegoat, a villain. And this time they find him in a scrawny, mop-headed boy with too many questions and not enough friends. Jean Grenier is skinny, odd, and poor. He wanders between farms, looking for work, sleeps in stables, and mutters to himself more often than most people are comfortable with. And then, one day, he brags to a group of girls that he's the one responsible for the missing children, that he's a wolf by night, that he belongs to a secret pack of shapeshifters who serve a man in black. He even says, with far too much confidence, that he's faster than any dog and stronger than any man. Not exactly playground banter. Now you might think he's just a weird kid trying to get attention. Sure, but this is 17th century France, where saying, "I'm a werewolf," doesn't make you edgy. It makes you eligible for trial. The girls report Jean to the authorities. He's arrested, questioned, and, without much fuss, confesses. In fact, he's eager. He says the devil gave him a powder that lets him turn into a wolf, that he used to run with others under the full moon, that he killed livestock, that he even tasted human flesh and liked it. You gulp. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of a straight-up death sentence, Jean is sent to the Franciscan monastery at Bordeaux. The judges there are baffled. He's so young, so earnest, so very obviously not a werewolf. But the confession is there, the fear is real, and the people demand answers. So they compromise. Jean is declared insane. They say he suffers from lycanthropic delusions, a primitive but oddly modern diagnosis for the time. He's locked away, not burned. That, in itself, is rare. A sign that the culture is beginning to shift, slowly, reluctantly, but still shift. He spends the rest of his life in that monastery, reportedly behaving like an animal, barking, crawling, eating raw meat, whether it was madness or trauma or just an incredibly long commitment to the bit. No one's sure. Historians still argue whether Joan was genuinely delusional or a frightened boy who believed his own lies after being told they were true over and over again. But back in the village, the facts don't matter. Jean is gone. The fear lingers. The fields feel no safer. And now the whispers aren't just about grown men in the woods. They're about children too. Because if a boy can be a werewolf, who's safe? You hear it in the way people speak. At the market, a woman clutches her child's hand a little tighter. At the mill, a man eyes a teenager too tall for his age with open suspicion. A nervous dog barks at a passing cart, and suddenly everyone looks up like they're expecting it to talk in Latin again. And you remember something Jean said during questioning, something that made the scribes pause. I ran faster as a wolf than I ever did as a boy, and I wasn't afraid anymore. That line haunts you a little, because maybe that's what this is about. Power, fear, loneliness, the things we want to be, wrapped in the skin of things we're told to fear. The trial of Jean Grenier marks a turning point, not the end of werewolf hysteria, but the beginning of its transformation from a legal nightmare into a psychological one. From fire pits to padded cells, there's something deeply human about the werewolf myth. It's the ultimate escape fantasy, shedding the skin of your responsibilities and becoming pure instinct. No guilt, no bills, just fur, fangs, and freedom. And if you happen to eat a few chickens along the way, well, nobody's perfect. But for now, in this story, it still costs lives. The night falls again. This time, the wind howls a little louder through the cracks in the window. You sleep with one hand on your lantern. You dream of running, of paws on dirt, of laughter that turns into growls. In the morning, another child is missing. This time, no one wants to ask questions. They just light the torches. You wake to the sound of church bells ringing, not the joyful kind that mark weddings, or the feast of some saint who never visited your village, but the slow, heavy clang of judgment. Someone's been arrested again. The fear hasn't lessened. If anything, it's matured, like cheese left too long in a damp cellar. No longer raw panic, but a deeply rooted suspicion baked into daily life. The werewolf trials aren't just bursts of hysteria anymore. They've become ritual, routine, a part of how justice is served. And now something else is starting to shift. The church is getting involved, really involved. This wasn't always the case. In the early days, werewolves were often seen as creatures of folklore, beasts of the forest, closer to fairy tales than theology. But as the trials continued and the accusations grew darker, more structured, the church could no longer shrug and say, "Probably just wolves being wolves." They had to pick a side, and they did. They decided werewolves were not just monsters, they were heretics. According to emerging church doctrine, lycanthropy wasn't simply an unfortunate magical accident. It was the result of pacts with the devil, of men and women turning away from God and toward the dark promise of forbidden power. And suddenly, werewolf trials weren't just about claw marks and suspicious behavior. They were about sin, and sin could be prosecuted with holy fire. You're watching the accused now, a man named Baltzar, middle-aged, gaunt, with eyes that never quite land on yours. He stands chained in the cathedral's courtyard, while an inquisitor, robed and stern, reads from a parchment that's longer than it needs to be. Baltzar is accused not just of turning into a wolf, but of worshiping Satan in the woods, of smearing his body with ointments made from unholy substances and invoking spirits by howling in Latin. Someone even says they saw him burying bones near the church cemetery, in a manner most suspicious. You raise an eyebrow. Is there a non-suspicious way to bury bones? The trial begins. No lawyers, of course, no defense, just questions, torture, and God. The inquisitor asks Baltzar if he's ever met the black man with goat's legs. Baltzar says no. They tighten the ropes. He screams. A few minutes later, he says yes. And then the story spills out. He says he was lonely, that he was promised strength, that he rubbed the ointment on his skin and felt the change begin. His hands grew thick with fur, his back arched, his teeth sharpened, that in the dark of the forest he became a hunter. He doesn't remember the killings, just the hunger. That's enough. He is convicted of heresy, lycanthropy, and consorting with demons. He is sentenced to be burned, not as a beast, but as a soul corrupted beyond saving. Historians still argue whether the church's increasing involvement in werewolf trials was driven by genuine concern or just a convenient way to reinforce their authority. Because when everything, even shape-shifting, can be blamed on sin, then salvation becomes a monopoly. But let's not get too modern with our cynicism. The church did believe, in its own way, that it was saving people, that by purging the werewolves, they were cleansing the land, protecting the innocent, and maybe, in some twisted theological logic, they were. Still, something doesn't sit right. You walk past a pile of ashes where Baltzar once stood. The air smells like scorched wool and regret. Back in town, the sermons grow more dramatic. Priests begin to warn of entire forests inhabited by beasts that were once men. They speak of Satan's army, an army with fur and claws. They tell children to sleep with crosses under their pillows and avoid strangers who limp. Even dreams aren't safe. One friar preaches that the devil visits in sleep and offers wolf skins to the tempted, that if you accept one, you'll wake up different, cursed, and possibly shirtless. And the people believe it. Why wouldn't they? It's easier to believe that evil takes the form of a hairy man in the woods than to admit that fear, hunger, and isolation are what truly change people. That most monsters wear plain faces and say good morning just like everyone else. You hear about another trial in a neighboring town. This time it's a woman, Marie, a widow. She's accused not of howling at night, but of running too fast in the woods, of knowing herbs that make people sleepy, of being overly familiar with wild dogs. You think, wait, since when is jogging suspicious? But again, it doesn't matter. Marie is forced to confess. She says she met a man near a crossroads who offered her meat that never spoiled and hands that could become paws. She took the gift. She didn't mean to hurt anyone. She just wanted to run. They burn her too. You sit by the fire that night, watching the flames lick at your stew pot. The woods beyond your window are quiet, too quiet. You think about Baltzar and Marie, about loneliness, temptation, and the strange power of belief, about how once an idea has a collar around its neck, it can be led anywhere. And you wonder, how many of these people actually believed they were werewolves? Maybe some of them did. Maybe belief is a kind of transformation all on its own. The sun rises over frost-bitten grass, and the fog lingers a little longer than usual, like even it doesn't want to let go of the night. You pull your cloak tighter and listen as the whispers begin again. But this time, they're not just about people turning into wolves. They're about how it happens. Because now we're diving into the strange, sticky world of shape-shifting testimonies. The bits in trial records where accused werewolves explain, sometimes with shocking enthusiasm, exactly how they transform. Spoiler alert, it's rarely just "I got bit." In many cases, they describe elaborate rituals, homemade brews, and very questionable ointments. Apparently, lycanthropy isn't just a curse, it's DIY. Take the case of Hans the Butcher, arrested in 1589. Hans confessed that he turned into a wolf by rubbing a salve made from belladonna, wolfsbane, and, brace yourself, fat rendered from unbaptized infants. Yup, baby fat stew. Who comes up with this stuff? Hans claimed the concoction allowed him to shed his skin, literally, and run with a pack of infernal beasts through the hills. He described it like a family reunion, only hairier and more bitey. When asked how he came across such an exotic recipe, he said it was taught to him by an old man in the woods who had glowing red eyes and walked with a limp. So basically, the medieval version of a YouTube tutorial. Another account tells of a belt made of wolf hide and enchanted by a sorcerer that granted the wearer the power to transform at will. No potion, no prayer, just belt up, beast out. These magical belts show up a lot in werewolf lore. You wonder if people feared actual shape-shifting or just really good accessories. Historians still argue whether these items, belts, salves, cloaks, were literal or symbolic. Were they physical tools used in rituals, drug delivery methods, or metaphors for shedding human responsibility and giving in to primal instincts? One theory suggests the salves were real, but laced with hallucinogenic plants like henbane or mandrake, causing vivid visions and possibly very enthusiastic howling. And it wasn't just what the accused claimed. They acted the part too. In one trial, the suspect reportedly began growling mid-testimony, crouching low and snarling at the inquisitor. Some accounts even say he snapped his teeth at the scribe. Was it madness, performance, or a man who knew that if they'd already decided he was a beast, he might as well growl? You walk through the town square again. This time, the gossip has a little spice to it. People aren't just asking, is he a werewolf? But how does he change? The stories become more elaborate. One man supposedly changes in the presence of pine smoke. Another must eat a raw egg under a new moon. Someone else can't transform unless they sing a certain hymn backwards. Honestly, at this point, it's starting to sound like the world's creepiest party game. But to the people of the time, these details mattered because they gave shape to the fear. Ritual made the impossible feel almost understandable. If transformation followed rules, then maybe it could be prevented, controlled, reversed. So they studied the testimonies, wrote them down, compared notes. Some clergy even built entire sermons around these shape-shifting steps, warning the faithful not to touch suspicious herbs or wear fur on Fridays. Superstition became policy, and sometimes even the church couldn't resist getting in on the drama. One report from southern Germany tells of a bishop who kept a werewolf diary, documenting every transformation story he came across, complete with crude little drawings. One depicted a man mid-shift, with goat legs and a wolf's face, holding a spoon. You kind of want to frame it, but underneath the absurdity, there's something else. Desperation. The world was harsh, uncertain. Plague came without warning. Crops failed. Children vanished. People needed reasons. And if those reasons wore fur and growled under the moonlight, well, so be it. The testimonies also revealed another unsettling theme: temptation. Most accused didn't say, "I was cursed." They said, "I chose this." They talked about wanting freedom, power, escape, the ability to run through the trees without fear, to silence their hunger, to be feared instead of fearing. One man, Klaus of Tyrol, claimed that after turning into a wolf, he ate the heart of his enemy and felt lighter than air, more alive than ever. Not a Yelp review you'd want to see, but revealing nonetheless. You lean back against a tree and listen to the wind rustle the branches. Somewhere nearby, someone is telling a story about the time they saw a man disappear into the shadows, and a moment later, a pair of glowing eyes blinked back at them from the underbrush. You wonder if it was real. But that's the thing, isn't it? These stories weren't meant to be verified. They were meant to linger, like the one about a woman who claimed she became a wolf only in her dreams, but woke up with blood on her hands, or the teenager who said he could only shift if someone else watched. You remember that as you walk home, feeling like every rustle behind you might be more than the wind, and you don't look back. The first snow arrives quietly, just a dusting over the rooftops and fields, like powdered sugar over something much less sweet. It should feel peaceful. It doesn't. Because now the whispers have changed again. It's not just the strange loners or the wild-eyed shepherds under suspicion anymore. It's the kindly widow, the young seamstress, the baker's wife who always smiles just a little too long. You're learning something important here, something cold and ancient. Werewolves wear many faces, because the truth is, not all accused werewolves were men. Plenty were women. And the shift in suspicion is both subtle and seismic. At first, people say, "Well, she lives alone." Then it's, "She talks to herself." Then, "I swear I heard her growling behind the house." And finally, like falling dominoes, she's accused of luring children into the woods and feasting on them beneath the full moon. Just like that, she's no longer a woman. She's a beast in a bodice. One of the most famous cases, Pernette Gandillon of France. It's 1598. Pernette is older, strange, and poor. And unfortunately for her, she's around when a child turns up dead in a gruesome scene straight out of a horror painting. Locals say they saw Pernette near the woods earlier that week, mumbling something, possibly praying. She's accused of witchcraft and lycanthropy because at this point the two charges are blending together. To be accused of one is to be suspected of the other, and Pernette doesn't stand a chance. Under torture, she confesses to turning into a wolf and attacking children with her claws. She's executed soon after. Her entire family is investigated. Several are also put to death. You sit with that for a while. It's one thing to believe in monsters. It's another to build a legal system around them. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of women in werewolf trials was about actual belief or just an extension of pre-existing misogyny. Some scholars point out that by the late 1500s, werewolf lore had become tangled with witchcraft accusations, and since women were already the prime suspects in witch trials, it was only natural, or rather inevitable, that they'd become werewolves too. Conveniently, this made it easier to prosecute anyone considered odd, opinionated, or just inconvenient. And women weren't the only ones added to the suspect list. Elderly villagers, the mentally ill, and the disabled were also frequently accused. If you limped, muttered, drooled, or twitched at the wrong time, you were halfway to wolf status in the eyes of your neighbors. You think back to a story you heard just yesterday about Marta, the widow who walks the river path at dusk. She says she does it to ease her aching legs. Others say she's meeting a demon lover in the reeds. One child swears he saw her drink from a puddle, like a beast. You wonder how long before someone knocks on Marta's door. But this isn't just about fear, it's also about power. Accusing someone of being a werewolf was a tidy way to eliminate enemies, rivals, or that weird person who owed you a goat and never paid up. Once an accusation stuck, the accused was socially dead, if not actually dead. Their property could be seized, their land redistributed, their family marked. It's amazing how quickly justice looks like opportunism when you add a tail and fangs to it. Still, the stories grow stranger. One woman claimed she became a wolf to visit her lover in another village. She said running on all fours was faster. Another reportedly gave birth to a stillborn pup. Though most historians agree that detail was probably added by someone with a vivid imagination and a flair for horror. Yet another tale tells of a village midwife accused of turning into a wolf after dark to steal back the babies she had delivered, as if reclaiming some secret maternal power. That one lingers. You find yourself eyeing the quiet women in your village differently now, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. What must it have been like to live in a world where your independence could be mistaken for sorcery, where a midnight walk or a strong opinion might land you in court, chained and interrogated by men who sincerely believed they were protecting the community from evil. There's a fringe theory that some of the women accused leaned into the werewolf narrative on purpose, not because they believed it, but because confessing gave them more power than begging for mercy ever could. If they were going to die, they might as well be feared. One record tells of a woman who, upon being condemned, said, "Let the devil take me, but tell him I bite." That's either a warning or a vibe, depending on how much sleep you've had. You think about Pernette, about Marta, about all the women whose stories were twisted into fur-covered caricatures, and you realize fear doesn't discriminate, but accusation often does. The snow crunches under your boots as you walk home. A dog howls somewhere in the hills. Or maybe it's something else. Hard to tell these days. You pass Marta's house. There's no light in the window. You don't knock. Snow deepens. It doesn't fall in soft flakes now. It stings. The world's gone white and gray, as though someone drained all the warmth out of the sky. It's the kind of cold that sinks into your teeth, and with it comes another story. This one's stranger still. You're in Livonia now, modern-day Latvia and Estonia, where the forests are older than the road maps, and the nights fall with a kind of ancestral weight. And here, in the late 1600s, we meet one of the most peculiar characters in werewolf history, Thys of Kaltenbrunn. He's not like the others. He's not accused of murder. He doesn't confess under torture. In fact, he shows up at court on his own and proudly announces, "I am a werewolf." You blink. Wait. What? Yes. Thys, an elderly man, 70 by some accounts, marches into court in 1692 and tells the baffled judges that not only is he a werewolf, but he's also a good one, a werewolf of God. Let that settle in. Thys explains that he and other hounds of heaven transform into wolves 3 times a year, on St. Lucia's Day, Pentecost, and St. John's Eve. During these nights, they descend into hell to do battle with witches and demons. Their goal? Retrieve stolen grain and livestock and return them to the surface for the benefit of the community. You're stunned. So are the judges. Thys says this without fear or shame. He's not begging for forgiveness. He's bragging. In his version of events, werewolves aren't agents of the devil. They're his enemies. Holy warriors, furry, bitey, slightly unhinged knights on a lunar crusade. You half expect him to start handing out pamphlets. Of course, the court doesn't buy it. They try to get him to confess to heresy, or at least retract the whole furry soldier of the Lord business. But he won't. He doubles down. Claims he's been doing this for years, says if the hounds of God fail in their mission, the harvest will rot and the land will fall under shadow. Thies is eventually whipped and banished, not for lycanthropy, but for superstitious belief. A legal wrist slap, relatively speaking. He walks away, head held high. Historians still argue whether Thies believed his own story or simply invented it to protect himself from deeper charges. Some say he was touched by madness. Others claim he represented a surviving strand of pre-Christian folklore, older than the devil, older even than fear itself. And here's a strange twist. His tale echoes ancient Indo-European myths of shapeshifters guarding the realm of the living from the underworld. Warrior wolves, guardian beasts, not cursed, but chosen. In this version, lycanthropy is a sacred duty, not a stain. It makes you wonder, what if all these stories, wolves in the woods, howls at night, humans changing shape, weren't born of fear at all? What if they came from hope? The belief that something wild, something strong, was out there fighting on our behalf. The village back home wouldn't understand. They still burn the accused. They still whisper behind hands and double lock their doors when the moon turns round and bold. But out here, in Livonia's frost-bitten silence, you hear something different. The snow crunches behind you, not in a threatening way, just a presence, a quiet, padded echo in step with your own. You don't turn around. Some things are better imagined than proven. And besides, you're starting to think Thies may have been onto something, because the world needs monsters, not the kind that tear and bite, but the kind that stand between us and worse things. The kind who wear fur and run through fire and drag the stolen light back from the dark. You warm your hands by the fire that night and feel a strange peace settle over you. You don't need to howl. Not tonight. Someone else is already out there, doing it for you. You wake to birdsong, real birdsong, not just the crows that usually argue outside your window like feathered drunks. It feels lighter today, almost warm, and for a moment you forget what world you live in. But then the church bell rings again, and the mood shifts. Because today's story isn't from the forests of Germany or the snowfields of Livonia. It comes from Switzerland, a place known for mountains, cheese, and, believe it or not, its incredibly detailed werewolf trial records. Let's talk about the town of Jürgensburg, late 15th century. It's a modest alpine village, mostly farming and goat complaints. But for a few months, it became the site of one of the most peculiar and meticulous werewolf investigations in Europe. The reason? A man named Peter Stumpf, not to be confused with the more infamous German werewolf of Bedburg. We'll get to him later. But Peter of Jürgensburg has his own bizarre tale. It starts with livestock. It always starts with livestock. Several farmers report finding sheep torn apart in the fields. Not eaten, just shredded. The wounds look surgical. No tracks, no signs of a normal wolf. The shepherds start murmuring. Then someone spots Peter, always alone, always watching the woods. Peter, of course, is a little odd. He's an herbalist, which already earns him side eyes. He lives at the edge of town, and once refused communion at Easter because the wine was too warm. Suspicious stuff. Soon rumors bloom like mold in a damp cellar. One boy swears he saw Peter running on all fours at night. A girl says her chickens went missing after she saw Peter sniffing the coop door. Someone even claims he barked during a funeral. That's it. That's the evidence. Peter is arrested. Now, here's where things get weird. He doesn't confess at first. Not under threats, not under bribes. But once the church sends in a formal inquisitor from Zurich, things escalate. Peter is subjected to something called the wolf rack. Picture a regular torture rack, but with added spikes, because apparently the logic was, if he is a werewolf, his healing powers will protect him. You blink. Still no confession. But then, on the third day, he cracks, says he was visited by a black rider in the forest who offered him a belt. There's that werewolf accessory again, and said it would make him powerful. Peter says he didn't want it at first, but life was hard, food was scarce, and he was tired of being weak. He took the belt. He says the moment he buckled it, he felt his mind split in two. One side still human, the other pure instinct. He would black out, wake up hours later in the woods, sore and covered in dirt and hair. This duality, the human mind versus the wolf body, comes up a lot in werewolf lore. Historians still argue whether early accounts of transformation were metaphors for mental illness, dissociation, or even PTSD. Some modern psychologists look at these confessions and see echoes of trauma, abuse, or repressed violence bubbling up through culturally sanctioned fantasy. But the court doesn't care about nuance. Peter is sentenced to death. However, and this is rare, they offer him one last option: absolution. A public confession followed by execution, but with the assurance that his soul will be spared. Peter agrees. He's paraded through the town square, forced to wear a wolf mask nailed to his head. Yes, really. And then burned at the stake. You think about that mask. The way a belief, once strong enough, can become costume, punishment, and eulogy all at once. That night, the village celebrates. The sheep are safe. The chickens cluck smugly, but you don't feel relief. You feel hollow because something doesn't add up. A week later, another sheep is found torn apart. Then another. You stare into the woods and wonder. Maybe Peter wasn't lying. Maybe he was a werewolf. Or maybe, just maybe, the wolf was never a man to begin with. Maybe the villagers got it wrong. Maybe they wanted to believe it was a man because that meant they could kill it. You stir the embers in your hearth and feel a chill. The fire cracks, and for a second you see shapes in the shadows, elongated, low to the ground, watching. They vanish when you blink. Of course they do, but you don't sleep easily that night because masks can be nailed on. But belief? That sticks. It's market day in your village. Baskets overflow with turnips, cabbages, and stale gossip. Children run between carts, and someone's trying to tune a lute very unsuccessfully. For a moment, things feel normal. But then you overhear a name. Peter Stump, the werewolf of Bedburg. Ah, him. If there's a poster child for European werewolf hysteria, it's Stump, with 2 P's, like the devil's version of a typo. His trial in 1589 Germany was one of the bloodiest, most theatrical werewolf cases in recorded history. And honestly, it's a mess. So grab your cloak. This one's going to be rough. Peter Stump was a wealthy farmer near Cologne, middle-aged, Protestant, in a Catholic region already spicy, and fairly well respected. Until one day people started finding body parts, not animal parts, human ones, mangled, scattered, unburied. Children were going missing, women too, and everyone was scared. Stump was arrested during one of the largest manhunts the region had ever seen. He was dragged into custody by a group of men and hounds who supposedly chased a large wolf into a thicket, only for the wolf to vanish and Stump to emerge, panting, from the bushes. Coincidence? The villagers didn't think so. Now here's where the story turns full nightmare. Under torture, you're seeing a trend. Stump confesses to being a werewolf for over 20 years. Says he made a pact with the devil at age 12. Claims he received a magic belt that let him transform into a greedy, devouring wolf, strong enough to tear limbs and crush bones. And if that isn't metal enough, he says he murdered and ate 14 children, 2 pregnant women, and his own son. Yes, it gets worse. He also allegedly had an ongoing romantic relationship with his daughter, and a demon lover disguised as a woman in black. You wince. But let's pause here. Historians still argue whether any of this is true, and by argue we mean heavily doubt it. Many believe Stump was the victim of a politically motivated execution. His Protestant background, his wealth, and his inconvenient land ownership making him a very attractive scapegoat. Remember, this was 1589. Tensions between Catholics and Protestants were boiling over. What better way to demonize a Protestant landholder than by literally calling him a demon? But the public didn't want nuance. They wanted spectacle, and that's exactly what they got. Stump's execution was a 3-part horror show. First, He was strapped to a wheel where chunks of flesh were torn from his body with red-hot pincers. Then both arms and legs were broken with the blunt side of an axe to prevent him from rising from the grave. Finally, he was beheaded and burned. His daughter and mistress were executed beside him. The townspeople watched. You sit with that image, the smell of burning wood, the crackle of fire, the silence that follows a crowd that's gotten exactly what it demanded. But the story doesn't end there. A pamphlet describing Stump's crimes was published in multiple languages. It traveled across Europe, becoming one of the earliest viral horror stories. Copies still exist today. The illustrations? Think woodcut gore, fangs, blood, snarling jaws, and terrified villagers. It's like a medieval tabloid, complete with wild exaggerations and very questionable anatomy. You wonder how many of those pamphlets were read in candlelight, eyes wide, imaginations wild. How many children fell asleep afraid of wolves, not knowing the real monster was the justice system. There's a fringe theory that Stump wasn't deluded, but playing along, that once he realized there was no escape, he leaned into the legend, confessing to everything the interrogators wanted to hear, that maybe, just maybe, becoming the monster was a final act of rebellion. You think about that? Sometimes stories don't reflect truth. They reflect fear. And the more fear you feed a story, the bigger and bloodier it grows. Until it eats the truth whole, you pass the church on your way home. The bells are quiet today, but carved into the stone near the entrance is an old symbol, a snarling wolf with a cross pierced through its chest. You never noticed it before, and suddenly you're not sure if it's meant to ward off evil or mark where it once stood. You're walking through the woods now, the kind where sunlight filters through tall trees in nervous little beams, like it's afraid to fully commit. There's a kind of hush here, not silence exactly, but the quiet of somewhere that's seen too much and prefers not to talk about it. This is the setting for another chapter in werewolf lore. Not of courts and public trials, but of rural whispers and local legends where the truth is softer and more slippery. This is where folk belief takes over. Not every werewolf story ends in fire and confession. Some just hang in the air, half fact, half fear. You see, not all communities wanted to prosecute their werewolves. Some villages needed them. Let me introduce you to the idea of the Benandanti, a group of peasant mystics from 16th century Italy who believed they left their bodies at night in spirit form to fight witches and evil spirits. Not quite werewolves, but definitely supernatural shapeshifters. In some versions of the tale, they became animals, wolves, owls, even weasels, to defend crops and villages from demonic threats. The Inquisition, of course, didn't love this. Eventually, they were rebranded as heretics, and many of them prosecuted. But before that, the Benandanti were treated like community guardians. People came to them for advice, healing, even protection. There are similar stories scattered across Europe. In parts of the Balkans, legends speak of vukadlaks, wolf spirits who could protect or curse, depending on how you treated them. In Estonia, some believed that werewolves were punishments, yes, but also penitents, souls working off their sins in fur and fang until redemption came. And in Finland, tales circulate of men who chose the wolf's path, not as a deal with the devil, but as a form of spiritual trial. To become the beast was to shed pride, weakness, and fear. It wasn't damnation, it was cleansing. Historians still argue whether these beliefs existed alongside mainstream Christianity or beneath it, like moss beneath a church stone. Some say they're pre-Christian holdovers. Others claim they were invented during moments of crisis, bad harvests, war, disease, when people needed something to believe in that felt strong and ancient. You stop for a moment on the trail. There's a rock here, shaped like a claw. No one else sees it, of course, but you notice, because you're paying attention now. There's a story from a village in Austria, too small to show up on most maps, where an old man was accused of being a werewolf. But the villagers didn't arrest him. They fed him, left bowls of milk at his door, hung garlic on his windows not to banish him, but to give him strength. They believed he was cursed, yes, but also that he fought for them, that every full moon he wandered the hills, not to hunt them, but to chase away worse things. Things without names. You wonder if that old man ever howled, or if he simply walked in silence, knowing that fear and gratitude often wear the same face. You cross a stream, and your reflection startles you. You don't quite recognize your own eyes for a moment. Maybe it's the light, maybe not. There's something comforting about these stories, even with their claws. A kind of wild reassurance that the world isn't just ruled by kings and churches and men with whips, but by old magic, by fur and teeth, and a kind of truth too deep for words. You think back to your village, the markets, the trials, the masks. How many of those accused had secrets they never told? How many were more than just what they seemed, or maybe less? Maybe the real secret is that everyone has a beast inside them. Some hide it, some feed it, and some make peace with it and walk into the woods with open arms. You reach a clearing. The wind picks up. Somewhere far off, something howls. Not a wolf, exactly, but not a wolf either. You listen, and then slowly you keep walking, because not all trails lead back. The path winds downward now, toward the marshlands, low, wet country where fog never quite lifts, and everything smells like old secrets. You tighten your cloak, not from the cold, but from the stories that live here. Stories of wolves, yes, but stranger things too. This is where werewolves blur into witches. It's a strange evolution, one historians still debate. In the early days, the werewolf was a physical monster, a beast that tore flesh, ran on four legs, and could be chased with torches. But by the 17th century, the creature began to morph in the minds of Europe. Less blood, more broomsticks, less snarling, more spells. You see it in the court records. Take the trial of Greta Faust, held in 1633 in what is now northern France. Greta was accused of witchcraft after several children in the village fell ill and claimed to have seen a black wolf with human eyes near their windows. One of them said the creature whispered her name. Greta, like many older women of the time, was already unpopular. She made tinctures, knew how to set broken bones, had once shouted at the mayor's wife in the street. Classic recipe for suspicion, but instead of simply accusing her of poisoning or hexing, which would have been standard fare, the village insisted she became the wolf. Not metaphorically, literally. They said she transformed at night, ran through the marshes, and drank from the river like a beast. Greta denied everything at first. Then came the examination. Torture, yes, but also more humiliating rituals. They searched her body for witches' marks, strange moles, scars, or blemishes believed to be signs of a pact with the devil. They found one on her shoulder, declared it unnaturally shaped. She was condemned. What's interesting here is that Greta's trial started as a werewolf case, but ended as a witch hunt. This wasn't uncommon. Over time, the image of the werewolf began to merge with the witch in league with Satan narrative. And the cause of the transformation? No longer magic belts or wolfskin cloaks, but pacts, curses, Sabbaths held deep in the woods. This shift wasn't accidental. By the 17th century, the Church had fine-tuned its theology around evil. The devil wasn't just a figure lurking in the forest. He was an architect offering contracts. If someone changed into a beast, it wasn't because they were sick or strange. It was because they had signed something. This gave authorities a clear moral binary. No more gray areas. Either you were godly or you were a beast in disguise. And yet, even as courts grew more legalistic and doctrine-heavy, the stories remained wild. Children still told tales of half-wolves leaping across rooftops. Hunters claimed to find human footprints beside claw marks. One woodsman in Bavaria said he followed a wolf into a clearing only for it to vanish, leaving behind a woman's scarf snagged on a branch. Was it evidence? No. Was it enough? Absolutely. You stop at a pool of still water. For a moment, the surface is perfectly smooth. then a ripple. You see your reflection distort. And just for a second, less, you see something else. Teeth, fur, gold eyes. Then it's gone. You shake it off. Not all countries embrace the werewolf-witch fusion, though. In places like Lithuania and Croatia, the old stories held longer. The wolf was still a physical creature. A man might become one through sin, but he didn't necessarily need to be a sorcerer to do so. Sometimes hunger was enough. Still, the trials blurred. The testimonies grew more creative. One woman, accused in Poland, claimed she was forced to transform after eating a cursed meat pie. Another said she wore a magical brooch given to her by a man who turned into smoke. A boy in Hungary swore his grandmother became a wolf every Thursday and stole shoes, not lives, just shoes. A detail you're still not over. Historians still argue whether these confessions were fantasy, hallucination, or just people saying whatever it took to stop the pain. But the blending of witch and werewolf tells us something important. By the 1600s, Europe wasn't just afraid of beasts in the forest. It was afraid of people becoming something else entirely, something outside of human control. Because deep down, the werewolf isn't just about teeth and claws. It's about transformation, about the horror that anyone, your neighbor, your friend, yourself, could become something monstrous, and you'd never know until it was too late. You leave the marsh behind. The air smells of rot and sage. There are hoof prints in the mud, but no horses. The wind picks up. You don't look back. The woods are thinning now, and you start seeing stones again, not just scattered rocks, but arranged ones, old ones, boundary markers, crumbling gateposts, toppled gravestones whose names have been weathered into nonsense. You've entered one of those in-between places. Not quite village, not quite wilderness. This is where folklore lingers after fact has given up. And it's the perfect time to talk about something rarely mentioned in werewolf stories: children. You see, while grown men and women dominated the trial records, children weren't always innocent bystanders. In many cases, they were accused too. There's one particularly eerie story from 1603 in Bruges, Belgium. A boy named Jean Grenier, just 13 years old, was arrested after several children went missing. He didn't deny it. In fact, he told the magistrate that he was a werewolf and had eaten at least one of them. But it gets stranger. Jean said he was recruited by a mysterious tall man in black who gave him a salve and a wolf skin. He claimed to run with a pack of other young werewolves at night, hunting like brothers under the devil's moon. The trial notes even recorded him miming how he tore flesh from the bone, unprompted. He was small, underfed, and clearly disturbed. One report said his teeth seemed sharper than normal, and that he would growl if questioned too harshly. You shiver. Gene wasn't executed, though. Instead, he was committed to a monastery where he lived out his teenage years in isolation. A visiting monk later described him as vacant-eyed and distant, as if he lived between this world and some darker place. Historians still argue whether Gene was mentally ill, traumatized, or simply parroting things he'd heard. But the fact remains, even children were seen as capable of monstrous change, and worse, some were believed to enjoy it. Other stories add more layers. In parts of rural France and Germany, legends arose of children born during a full moon being marked by the wolf. If they had hairy palms or a long second toe, classic medieval pseudoscience, it was taken as a sign they would one day turn. And if that child happened to act strange, wander alone, bite another child during a fight, well, the town's imagination did the rest. One chilling tale from Norway tells of a 7-year-old girl who was believed to be a cub of the devil. She'd survived a wolf attack at age 4 and had a scar on her throat. Afterward, she stopped speaking for 2 years. When livestock began disappearing, she was blamed. Someone claimed to see her eyes glow in the dark. She disappeared one winter night. Her body was never found. You pause near one of the boundary stones and trace its moss-covered top. You wonder what lines we draw between child and creature, between misunderstood and monstrous. The people of the past didn't always bother with distinctions. Then there are the feral child legends. In several parts of Eastern Europe, stories circulated of children raised by wolves, not metaphorically, but literally, found naked in forests, running on all fours, growling, biting, sometimes covered in downy hair. Many of these tales were clearly exaggerated, but a few were recorded by traveling priests and noblemen with unsettling consistency. One 17th century document describes a boy found in Transylvania who could not speak, only howl, and whose nails curved like claws. He died after a few weeks, unable to adjust to human food or clothing. Science today would call these tragic cases of extreme neglect, malnutrition, or developmental disorders. But back then, they were seen as evidence that the beast was real, that it could breed, that humanity could be undone. You look up. The trees are thinner now, but their shadows stretch longer somehow. You're not alone, but not in the way that's threatening. More like watched, not hunted, observed. Another detail sticks with you from Jean Grenier's case. When asked if he regretted anything, he simply said, "I liked the running." You get that? The world of rules, judgment, and fear is heavy. The woods are lighter, wild, free, even if they're dangerous, especially because they're dangerous. And isn't that the secret at the heart of every werewolf story? Not just the fear of losing control, but the desire to run, to bite, to be unbound. You step over the last mossy stone and find yourself back on a trail. It's faint, but it's there. Ahead, a clearing. You smell wood smoke. You walk toward it. Whatever waits there, at least it's real. You enter the clearing, and it's like stepping out of a dream. Smoke curls from a low stone chimney. Someone's tending a fire. A black pot bubbles, and seated nearby on a stump is a woman, old, maybe, or just tired in the bones. She nods when she sees you, like she's been expecting this moment for years. You sit. She doesn't ask your name, just hands you a cup of something herbal and steaming, and begins to speak. No introductions, just stories. She tells you about the werewolves of Poligny, a town in eastern France that earned the nickname La Cité des Loups, the City of Wolves. In the 16th century, it was struck by a wave of hysteria so fierce that it practically turned into a cultural identity. It started, as these things often do, with a missing child, then another, then a third, found mauled near the edge of the forest. People whispered of a great wolf. Then they said it walked like a man. Then they said it was a man. Dozens were accused over the next decade. One man, Michel Verdun, confessed under torture that he, his wife, and a friend would smear a salve over their bodies and transform into wolves. They met in the woods, hunted together, even shared kills. His wife was never caught, but his friend, Pierre Bourgault, also confessed, saying he had once vowed allegiance to a man in black during a thunderstorm in exchange for safety. And here's the kicker. Both men claimed they regretted nothing. That's unusual. Most confessions at least pretend to show guilt, remorse, fear, pleas for forgiveness. But these two, they describe the transformations as liberating. Bourgault said he felt cleansed of weakness. Verdun claimed that no hunger is like the hunger of the wolf, and no joy matches its fulfillment. You sip the warm drink. Historians still argue whether these confessions reflected actual belief or just survival tactics under unbearable pain. But there's something deeper here, a recurring theme that's hard to shake. The idea that becoming a beast is not just a fall, it's a release. You think about that, because as much as the courts wanted to paint werewolves as monsters, some of the accused described their experiences in terms closer to freedom than horror. There's a case from Switzerland in 1566 where a shepherd named Hans was convicted of lycanthropy. Under questioning, he explained that when he turned, he could see better, run faster, think more clearly. "The wind loved me," he said. "Even the birds stopped to watch." Poetic stuff for someone about to be burned alive. You ask the woman if she believes any of it. She shrugs, says belief is a funny thing. Some stories live longer than the people who told them, she adds, stirring her pot. Sometimes truth wears a tail to get past your defenses. You glance into the fire. It crackles like it has secrets. Another tale floats up, this one more recent, from the early 1700s, a time when the werewolf panic had mostly cooled down but not vanished. A man in Bavaria was arrested for attacking a neighbor during a full moon. No one said werewolf out loud, but everyone thought it. His defense? I don't remember it, but I don't deny it. Let that sink in. He didn't try to escape punishment, didn't call it slander. He accepted that he might have a part of himself that did things he didn't understand, that maybe, at some point, he had stopped being a man for a while. Not in shape, but in intent. And that, more than anything, may be what a werewolf truly is. Not a creature with fur and fangs, but a human who, under the right pressure, breaks, becomes something else, something older, something without apology. You look at the woman again. Her eyes gleam, not with menace, but with memory. You realize she's told these stories many times. Maybe lived pieces of them, maybe not. Hard to say. She says one last thing before the fire dies down. The wolf is only the shape. The hunger was always yours. You thank her, though you're not sure why. The cup is empty. The smoke thins. She's still seated when you rise and leave the clearing, but you don't hear her move or breathe. The trail is clearer now, firmer underfoot. You don't feel lighter exactly, but you feel more certain. The stories have teeth, but so do you. The path dips into low hills now, rolling and worn, like the spines of sleeping giants beneath the grass. You're alone again, but not lonely. The stories follow you, clinging like burrs to your thoughts. The wolves are quieter here, but not gone. Tonight we cross into the realm of medicine and madness, where werewolves are no longer cursed, but diagnosed. The year is 1850. Science is beginning to push back against superstition. Steam engines rumble. Electricity hums in wires. But somewhere in a small clinic outside Paris, a doctor writes the word lycanthropy in a patient's file, not as folklore, but as a mental illness. This is where the werewolf story changes again. For centuries, lycanthropy had been the realm of courts and confessions. But by the 19th century, doctors began encountering patients who genuinely believed they were wolves. These weren't killers or con artists. They were often gentle, confused souls who barked, crawled, and begged to be restrained during full moons. The most famous case? Possibly Jean de La Fontaine, no relation to the poet. He was brought to a sanatorium after claiming that his hands were growing claws and that his jaw ached for raw flesh. He was found curled in a corner of his room, refusing to speak, growling when touched. Doctors diagnosed him with clinical lycanthropy, a rare but real psychiatric condition. Even today, it appears in medical literature, where people, often during psychotic breaks, believe they've transformed into an animal. Historians and psychologists still argue whether these cases are culturally induced or biologically rooted. Is the wolf just a symbol the brain grabs onto when everything else breaks? Or is there something deeper, a primal myth buried in our collective memory, waiting to surface when the mind frays? You remember Jean Grenier, the child who claimed to run with a pack under the devil's moon. Could he have had the same affliction? Or was it just fear wrapped in a child's fantasy? Either way, science was beginning to do what courts never could: offer compassion. Sort of. Because even as lycanthropy became a diagnosis, the world remained wary. Patients were still isolated, misunderstood, sometimes feared. The word werewolf didn't vanish, it just moved from the pulpit to the textbook, and then came literature. You can't talk about this era without mentioning the rise of Gothic fiction, the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, and yes, The Werewolf, a short novel by Clemens Hausmann from 1896, where the creature is seductive, tragic, and feminine. These stories weren't about beasts in the forest anymore. They were about the beast within. You stop beside a gnarled tree and touch the bark. Rough, real. You think of all the characters who wore human faces by day and hunted by night. How fiction mirrored the psychology, and how psychology circled back to fiction. Even Freud got in on the act, linking werewolf myths to repressed desire and rage. Classic Freud. Everything's about your mother or wanting to eat someone, apparently. But his students took it further. One early 20th century theory claimed that werewolf legends were born from ancient trauma, rituals gone wrong, rites of passage soaked in blood. Others pointed to ergot poisoning, a hallucinogenic fungus in old grain, or rabies, which can cause aggression, biting, and a fear of water, eerily close to some werewolf behaviors. More theories, more explanations, and yet none of them feel like the whole picture. You see, there's something about the werewolf that resists definition. It slips out of traps. It dodges diagnosis. Every time we try to pin it down as sin, disease, delusion, or metaphor, it changes shape. Maybe that's the point. One last story from England this time. Early 1900s, a man is found living in the woods near Yorkshire, naked and filthy, but not aggressive. Locals call him the Wolf Man. He eats raw meat, avoids speech, and runs on all fours. Doctors eventually identify him as a long-lost veteran with severe shell shock. They take him to a hospital. He never speaks, but at night, Nurses swear they hear him howl, not in rage, not in pain, just longing. And you wonder, not everyone who becomes a beast does so because they want to destroy. Some just want to disappear. The wind picks up, dusk falls like a soft cloak over the hills. You keep walking. The difference between madness and myth is thinner than you thought. And both wear fur. The hills behind you fade into shadows, and the road grows cobbled and tight. You've entered a village now, not yours, not really, but close enough in smell and shape to feel familiar. Lanterns flicker in windows, dogs bark, then go silent. There's a notice nailed to a post. Beware, black beast in the woods. A crude drawing shows a creature, part man, part wolf, its eyes wide and white. You've seen this before. Many have, because tonight we're stepping into the Beast of Gévaudan, one of the most famous werewolf legends in Western Europe, and the one most people think they know. The year is 1764, the place, Gévaudan, a mountainous, rugged region in southern France. Poor, isolated, and deeply Catholic, it's the kind of place where wolves are already feared. But something new starts happening. Children go missing. Women are found dead in fields. The wounds are different. Throats torn, skulls crushed, bodies partially eaten. Rumors grow fast and sharp. Witnesses say they saw a creature unlike any known wolf, larger, reddish-brown, with black stripes along its back, and a tail like a panther's. One girl swears it walked on two legs. Another claims it bowed before attacking. You lean in. These aren't just animal attacks. They're ritualistic, almost theatrical. The creature kills with precision and vanishes without tracks. Sometimes it attacks twice in one day, miles apart. People begin calling it La Bête, the beast. France is in a frenzy. Over 100 people are killed over 3 years. The king, Louis XV, takes notice and sends professional hunters, including his own gun-bearer. They fail. Even when a massive wolf is killed and stuffed, attacks continue. That's when things get weird. A man named Jean Chastel, a local farmer, claims to kill the beast in 1767. He says he prayed, loaded his gun with silver bullets, and shot it through the heart. Sound familiar? Yes. This is where the whole silver bullet idea may have taken root. Historians still argue whether Chastel killed a real animal or if he killed anything at all. Some say the beast was a trained animal, perhaps even an exotic pet escaped or released. A hyena, a lion. Others whisper it was a serial killer in disguise, using superstition as a smokescreen. Even today, no one agrees. What makes the Beast of Gévaudan special isn't just its body count or mystery. It's how it captured the national imagination, pamphlets, poems, songs, even pre-revolutionary politics. The king's failure to protect the people from the beast mirrored his failure to understand the countryside. It was a symbol of rural fear and growing anger, because beneath the fur and claws was class. The poor suffered, the rich hunted trophies, the peasants prayed, the nobles posed with muskets. In that sense, the beast wasn't just a monster. It was a message. And you feel it even now. You pass a well where, legend says, a child was snatched mid-prayer. The water is still, cold, deep. In the 20th century, the tale of Gévaudan inspired books, films, even conspiracy theories. One claimed it was a government experiment gone wrong. Another said Chastel was the beast, mad with grief after the death of his daughter. Or a hunter with a trained wolf dog setting attacks to later claim glory. But perhaps the strangest twist? Despite dozens of attacks, no one who saw the beast ever described it the same way. Some said it had hooves, others human eyes. Some called it demonic. Others said it looked sad. That inconsistency is the most human thing about it, because when you look at fear too closely, it reflects you. The beast didn't just hunt in forests, it hunted in the gaps, between belief and proof, between reason and ritual. It was the shape people needed it to be, punishment, warning, wildness incarnate. You hear a growl behind a closed door. Probably a dog. Probably. But tonight, Gévaudan feels closer than it should. The hills echo. Your steps quicken, because whether it walked on 4 legs or 2, wore fur or lies, the beast of Gévaudan lived in fear, in story, and in the space between, and maybe still does. The moon has risen, fat and low, hanging over a field littered with stubble and mist. You're outside the village now, no more lanterns. Just open land and the crunch of your own steps in the grass. And here, in this silver-blue silence, we talk about something that never quite fit the narrative, something that doesn't howl or hunt, but returns. Tonight, you meet the werewolf who came back to life. This tale comes from 17th century Livonia, what's now parts of Estonia and Latvia, where the folklore was thick with spirits, witches, and wolfmen who could walk through walls. Livonia was a strange place in this period, cold, forested, and deeply superstitious, with Christianity layered awkwardly over a much older pagan core. The man's name was Thias of Kaltenbrunn, and when he was brought to trial in 1692, he didn't deny being a werewolf. In fact, he insisted on it. He claimed he was one of many, an old, secret order of werewolves who weren't cursed, but chosen. They didn't serve the devil, they fought him. Every year, he said, on certain nights, they would leave their human bodies behind, take on the shape of wolves, and descend into hell to battle witches and demons who threatened the harvest. Yes, you heard that right. Theiss said werewolves were not villains, but holy warriors. He called himself a hound of God. This wasn't what the authorities expected. They were prepared for confessions of blood drinking and dark pacts. Instead, they got a man who described his shape-shifting in sacred terms, a duty, a calling. He told the court they were persecuting someone who had fought evil on their behalf. He was 80 years old at the time. The judges, understandably baffled, pressed him for more. He answered clearly, without fear. He spoke of battles underground, where witches tried to steal the world's grain and livestock. He said if the werewolves didn't stop them, the land would die. He even claimed that werewolves from Russia and Germany sometimes joined the fight, but they weren't as strong as the Livonian ones, naturally. Now, historians still argue whether Theiss was simply mad, or if he represented a fading pre-Christian belief system, the last embers of shamanic rituals, twisted over time. There's no torture mentioned in his case. He confessed freely, proudly. And what was his punishment? 10 lashes and a ban from communion. That's it. It's as if the court, after hearing him, simply didn't know what to do with someone who refused to be afraid of his own mythology. You smile at that, because Theiss flips the entire werewolf story on its head. In most tales, the transformation is a curse, a loss of control, something that isolates you. But in Theiss's mind, it was a form of service. He wasn't corrupted. He was committed. The werewolf as protector, not predator. You step over a small stream, barely more than a trickle. In the water, your reflection splits, moonlight in one half, shadow in the other. You wonder which side Theiss saw when he looked at himself. There are echoes of his story in other places, too. In the Balkans, Kresniks, mystic warriors, were said to take the forms of animals to protect their communities. Some turned into wolves, others into hawks or bears. They entered dream worlds to do battle with evil. It's a theme that keeps surfacing. Not every transformation is damnation. Some are duty. And perhaps that's why these stories endure, because they let us imagine power that isn't cruel, change that doesn't rot us from within, a strength that serves something greater than fear. As you walk on, you pass a row of posts driven into the ground. Some say this was once a border between parishes. Others say it marked the place where the wolves were laid to rest. If you count the posts aloud, it said, "You'll see a pair of glowing eyes appear at the edge of the field." You don't count. Not tonight. Because some wolves aren't meant to scare you. Some are just watching, to make sure you get home safe. The stars are out now, cold, clear, sharp enough to cut. You follow a ridgeline, boots crunching on frost-bitten grass, and beneath their light we arrive at something unexpected. Not blood, not curses, not fur, laughter. Because, believe it or not all werewolf stories are tragic. Some are downright absurd. Let's talk about werewolf satire, the forgotten genre where folklore, fear, and farce collide. The earliest example might be from ancient Greece, actually. A writer named Petronius, yes, that Petronius, the court jester of Emperor Nero, penned a strange and snarky tale in the Satyricon around the 1st century A.D. In it, a soldier tells a friend about traveling through the countryside only to watch his companion suddenly undress, pee in a circle, and turn into a wolf. The transformation is described very matter-of-factly, like someone changing their shoes. The man then runs off to terrorize a local farm. The punchline? Later, the narrator visits the farm himself, only to hear the farmer complaining about being attacked by a wolf the night before, and that the wolf had been stabbed in the neck. Back in the city, he sees his friend in bed, nursing a suspiciously similar wound. It's the world's first werewolf sitcom. You chuckle. Because it's comforting to know that even 2,000 years ago, people were joking about shapeshifters. In the Middle Ages, werewolves weren't always monstrous either. There's the story of Bisclaveret, a 12th century French lie written by Marie de France. In it, a nobleman secretly turns into a wolf a few days each month. His wife, discovering this, steals his clothes, which he needs to return to human form, and runs off with a lover. Poor Bisclaveret is stuck in wolf form for years, until he ends up at the king's court and proves his humanity by acting polite, loyal, and attacking only his ex-wife. The king, impressed by the wolf's manners, yes, really, gives him a place at court. Eventually, Bisclaveret gets his clothes back, turns human again, and lives happily ever after. Except the ex-wife, who gets her nose bitten off. And all her children are born noseless. You raise an eyebrow. Historians still debate what Marie de France meant with that story. Is it a satire of marriage, of nobility? Or was she genuinely proposing that some wolves might be better men than the men they were before? Either way, it's an early example of sympathetic werewolves, a trend that's grown wildly over time. In fact, by the 18th century, mock trials were held where actors pretended to be werewolves, usually to poke fun at the Inquisition or parody outdated superstitions. One pamphlet from Germany even describes a mock execution of a were-hedgehog who confessed to stealing cabbages and disrupting choir practice. You can't make this up. Or maybe you can. That's the point. You sit for a while on a stone fence. Somewhere in the distance a fox yelps, shrill and laughing, like it's in on the joke. Even into the 20th century, the werewolf kept its funny side. In 1941, the Wolfman introduced cinema audiences to the tortured, brooding lycanthrope. But even that inspired parodies within a decade. Abbott and Costello fought werewolves. Scooby-Doo unmasked them. Cartoons gave them allergies, braces, and emotional baggage. And of course, modern memes have turned them into everything from misunderstood boyfriends to reluctant accountants who only go beast mode on the full moon. You grin. Because here's the secret. Humor keeps fear from hardening into cruelty. For every tale of burning and accusation, some stories remind us that the line between human and beast can be softened, not by rules, but by relief. Laughter doesn't tame the monster, but it does remind you that it doesn't always win. You get up and keep walking. The ground is glowing with frost, and the trees sparkle like glass. There's something freeing about the idea that even the darkest legends have punchlines, that even the most cursed creature can stumble into a happy ending or at least a well-timed joke. After all, what's more human than that? You're deep into the woods again, but this time the path feels deliberate, as if you're not just walking, but being led. The moonlight casts long lines between trees like the bars of a cage, but they shift and sway with your steps. You're not trapped. You're inside something, a story, a ritual, a memory that isn't entirely yours. Tonight, we arrive at the final transformation of the werewolf myth, where it leaves behind claw marks and trial records and becomes something spiritual. In some cultures, the wolf was never a monster at all. It was a guide, a guardian, a totem. You begin with the berserkers, Norse warriors who wore animal pelts, entered trance-like rages, and claimed to become beasts in battle. Most wore bear skins, but some were known as Ulfhednar, wolf coats. They believed that by donning the spirit of the wolf, they could become immune to pain, fear, and weakness. Modern historians suggest mushrooms or ritualized trauma may have helped those transformations. But to the people watching, seeing a man roar and foam and rush a line of spears, it looked like magic. And maybe it was. In Siberia and Central Asia, shamans were said to turn into wolves during spirit journeys, not in flesh, but in essence. They'd describe running through the forest in their mind's eye, hunting evil spirits, communicating with the dead. The wolf was not an enemy, it was a vehicle. In parts of Turkey, there's a tale of the Kurt Adam, a man who becomes a wolf, not because he's cursed, but because he's needed. When danger approaches, he changes, fights, then returns. Quietly. No thanks required. You start to see the shift now, don't you? The werewolf as symbol of rage, hunger, madness. Yes, but also survival, strength, sacrifice. There's a Navajo concept, the skinwalker, often misrepresented, but rooted in real fears about the misuse of sacred transformation. Not everyone who wears the animal form does so with permission. Some steal it, some abuse it. That distinction matters. Not all shape-shifters are heroes, but not all are villains. In modern neo-pagan and witchcraft practices, the wolf appears again, not as a monster, but as an ally. Guided meditations call on wolf spirit for intuition, protection, and courage. Rituals under the full moon ask the participant to howl, not out of lunacy, but connection. Historians still argue whether these modern uses are revival, reinvention, or simple wishful thinking. But maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is this: the werewolf has become a mirror of fear, yes, of rage, of loneliness, of transformation, but also of agency. The question is no longer what if someone else turns, but what if you do? Would you control it, embrace it, regret it? There's an old Romanian tale of a village elder who turned into a wolf every full moon, not because he was cursed, but because it was his duty to patrol the forest borders. He never told anyone, but every time the livestock were safe, the children unharmed, the villagers would leave a bowl of soup on their doorstep, just in case. He never touched it. But the next morning, the footprints in the mud told them enough. You reach a small circle of stones in the clearing. Wind passes through like breath. You remember every story you've heard tonight. The cursed, the hunted, the protectors, the fools, the healers, the howlers, and somewhere in that shifting fur and shadow, you, because the werewolf endures not because we fear it, but because we recognize it. The rage we can't explain, the hunger we pretend not to have, the part of us that wants to run, rip, howl, not to destroy, but to feel something real. You close your eyes, you listen. In the distance, someone howls. It's not threatening, it's an invitation. You've come full circle. The forest is behind you, the hills, the marshes, the ruined chapels, the stories, left somewhere in the dark. Now you walk a narrow lane under a sky drained of color, where the stars hang soft and the wind sighs through tall grass. And tonight, the werewolf is no longer a monster. It's a metaphor. We end our journey with a final lens, the modern wolf, the shapeshifter of film, fiction, and fandom. A creature reborn in the age of silver screens and silver bullets, but also in memes, in TikToks, in paperback novels with moody covers and glowing eyes. Let's start with 1941. The Wolfman hits theaters, and everything changes. Lon Chaney Jr. plays Larry Talbot, a tragic figure bitten by a werewolf and cursed to become one himself. The transformation is grotesque, but not just physically, emotionally. He mourns, he hides, he tries to warn people. And of course, no one believes him. This version is the template, the sad, reluctant werewolf, the one who doesn't want to change but can't stop it. Every full moon, he becomes a danger to those he loves. The metaphor is clear. Addiction, grief, anger, loss of control. The beast is inside you, and it doesn't care how gentle you are when the sun is up. You sip from this cup too, don't you? But over time, the werewolf evolves again. By the 1980s, we have an American werewolf in London, blending body horror and black comedy. The transformation is agonizing, but also darkly funny. The wolf is real, but so is the absurdity of being cursed. In The Howling, the werewolves are part of a hidden society, civilized on the surface, feral underneath. It's a metaphor for power, desire, duality. The werewolf becomes a lens to explore what people do when no one's watching. And then came the romance era. Twilight turned the werewolf into a love interest, brooding, protective, shirtless in all weather. Suddenly the beast was desirable, safe, even. A misunderstood heartthrob who smelled like pine and had abs. And while it's easy to laugh, don't, because this too is part of the myth's evolution. The werewolf reflects what we fear, but also what we want. Security, passion, wildness, a partner who would literally tear someone apart to protect us. In television, werewolves became more layered. Buffy, Teen Wolf, The Vampire Diaries, Being Human, they all used lycanthropy to ask the same question. What makes you more dangerous, your instincts or your shame? You walk a little slower now. The path narrows to a foot trail. Grass grows high on both sides. There's no more destination, really, just presence. In books and games, the wolfman is often the outsider, the exile, the rogue hero, sometimes feared, sometimes hunted, always between worlds. And maybe that's why we keep returning to it, because all of us, at some point, live between selves. Who you are in public, who you are at 2 a.m., who you want to be, who you're afraid you already are. That tension is the werewolf. And now the werewolf isn't just a myth, it's a meme, it's a TikTok filter, it's a Halloween costume, a song lyric, a mood board aesthetic. It's funny, tragic, sexy, silly, it's everywhere, which means it's ours. The peasants and priests and poets are gone, but their wolf walks with us, and that's what makes it beautiful, because the werewolf isn't a warning anymore. It's a whisper. You could change. You already have. And now, dear listener, we step away from the shadow of the woods. Let the stories settle like dust beneath your thoughts. Let the claws retract, the eyes dim, the fur dissolve. You're still here, fully yourself again. or perhaps a slightly different version, one who knows what it means to transform, to hunger, to hold back. Tonight, you walked centuries. You heard the crackle of medieval firewood, the scream of frightened villagers, the laughter of courtroom jesters. You heard howls, some full of rage, some of grief, some of joy. You met witches, wanderers, warriors, and wounded souls. All of them wore the wolf in different ways. Some ran from it, some embraced it, but all of them left tracks in the dark. So now, close your eyes. Let your breath slow. Let the tension melt from your shoulders and the muscles behind your jaw unclench. You are safe here. The moon has watched you through it all, and now it begins to set. Your heartbeat eases, your thoughts scatter like leaves, and that part of you, the part that wondered if it could all be true, can curl up quietly now and rest. Because whatever shape you take tomorrow, for now, you are simply human and home. Good night, traveler. Sleep deep, sleep warm, sleep unchanged.